This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Life happens everywhere, like it never even happened, only happens here. The cleanup and restoration specialists at 1-800-SERVPRO and SERVPRO.com.
How your clothes smell can say a lot about you. That's why new Downy Protect and Refresh conditions fibers to lock out odors. New Downy Protect and Refresh.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Berman. Just for the record, the teleprompter John Berman and the rally John Berman, not to mention the disco John Berman. The breaking news this morning is that President Donald Trump is Donald Trump, the only Donald Trump, the one who moments ago levied a fresh attack on the Republican leaders of Congress, whom he refers to as Mitch M. and Paul R., and who moments ago seemed to relish in an image on social media, passing this on to his millions of followers, the best eclipse ever, with a picture of him obstructing President Obama. You know, I'm no expert on metaphors, but one literal interpretation of that might be that President Trump is suggesting he's some sort of dark, inanimate object obscuring a source of light. A new poll suggests the majority of Americans might think so. This new poll shows just 31% of voters say the president is uniting the country. 62% say he is dividing us. CNN's Suzanne Malveaux at the White House, where things just got very busy in a hurry.
They certainly did, John. I mean, we saw this flurry of tweets from the president. I mean, first, he's meeting behind closed doors with his director of the Office of Management and Budget to discuss and prepare for this huge debate that's going to take place with Senate Republicans over raising the debt ceiling. He's already tweeted out this morning, blaming in part the Republican leadership as well as the Democrats. I want to read you this tweet that just came out saying, "I've requested that Mitch M., Mitch McConnell, Paul R., Paul Ryan tie the debt ceiling legislation into the popular VA bill, which just passed for easy approval. They didn't do it, and so now we have a big deal with Democrats holding them up as usual on debt ceiling approval. Could have been so easy, now a mess." This comes, as you know, John, at a time when Mitch McConnell and the president having a very contentious phone call over various things, frustrations the president had, a profane-laced conversation, we are told, trying to patch it up, if you will. They say that they are going to be speaking when they come back to session. Senate comes back to session in about a week or so, that they'll sit down face to face. But this certainly doesn't help, kind of a Cold War, if you will, between the president and the Republican leadership now. Also, the president tweeting his frustration about the media and how people have portrayed and contrasted the two speeches that he made recently, very different tones. The president tweeting with several grammatical errors here, that the fake news is now complaining about my different types of back-to-back speeches. Well, there was Afghanistan, somber, the big rally, enthusiastic, dynamic, and fun, and the American Legion, Virginia, respectful and strong. Too bad the Dems have no one who can change tones. So that is what the president is putting out this morning, John. We are also expecting as well that the Wall Street Journal reporting that he is preparing on rolling out the military ban on transgendered individuals. That is something that members of Congress and, of course, the military community is going to be dealing with in the days to come, John.
All right, Suzanne Malveaux at the White House. As we said, it got very busy in a hurry there. Joining me now to discuss, CNN political analyst Michael Bender and Nathan Gonzalez, and Caitlin Huey-Burns, national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Guys, this new series of statements from the president seem to go in three baskets. Number one, this bizarre eclipse metaphor where he showed himself, covering up President Obama. Number two, this new attack on the Republican leaders of Congress. And then number three, explaining how he can have these different contradictory messages and how it's actually a good thing to be as contradictory as he is. Let's start first with Congress, Caitlin, because possible that has the greatest implication going forward. He's talking about the debt ceiling, which is a little bit arcane for most people to understand. But the bottom line here is the country could default on its debts, and the way he's choosing to deal with it is to attack Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan.
Right, exactly. And we know from covering debt ceilings in the past, the effort to raise them hinges upon agreements within the Republican Party. Remember, it's been the Republican Party that has diverged in terms of what they want to do on the debt ceiling. The president, by tweeting this publicly, is kind of giving the leverage to Democrats in a lot of ways. And so I think, Republicans already had a difficult time. Put aside the broader agenda like tax reform, healthcare, other things. They have to focus on raising the debt ceiling and passing a budget to fund the government. And on both of those key issues, basic tasks of governing, the president has come in and kind of thrown a grenade in their plans.
The internal Republican divisions are what could hold this up, and he just made them perhaps greater by saying what he said. All right, issue number 2, Michael, is this defense of his speeches over the last few days. He gave that speech on Afghanistan, then he gave that, stem winder rally thing in Phoenix, and then yesterday before the American Legion, he was more respectful again. He was bragging on Twitter, on social media, that this just shows how he can change tones. But the issue here, Michael, is it's not just that these are different messages, it's that they're directly contradictory. On the one hand, he's saying unite the country. On the other hand, he is being divisive.
Yeah, I think that's correct. He definitely issues some competing messages at different times when he speaks. But he's also a corrector. He is one of his party's and most gifted communicators right now. And his ability to go out there and give a stem winder, as you call it, or a more somber speech. What that does at sort of its base political level is allow people to hear what they want to hear. His supporters, it upsets his supporters, it rallies his base, and all these speeches yesterday in the last few days were given for very specific reasons.
Yeah, it's a great point, Nathan. It gives people what they want to hear. Does it give Republicans in Congress, again, the key constituency here to get what he wants passed, the legislation passed, and perhaps the key constituency to protect him on the Russia investigation, which we'll talk about in just a second, by giving the more somber, respectful speeches, that donut, if you will, around that aggressive speech? Does it give Republicans in Congress a chance, something to point at and say, hey, he's being the stable president we need?
I think it's helpful to me to come back and realize that the president doesn't think about what's good for the Republican Party. I mean, I would argue that Donald Trump isn't really a Republican at all. I mean, he became the president through the Republican Party, but he does not wake up in the morning and think what is best for the Republican Party, and I think that comes through in his tweets. And I also think the president is used to getting what he wants through either intimidation or embarrassing people, and that's just not how it works with congressional leaders or with senators. And so, it's fine if he doesn't want to put the Republican Party first. I think some of his supporters don't really care about the Republican Party either, but he needs the Republican Party to pass his agenda. And that's where, everything's getting sideways because he's not going about it in the right way. They might agree on the ends, but they have very different, a difference of agreement on the means to get there.
Let me just put up one poll number which sort of illustrates what Americans think, what message Americans are hearing from the president right now. The issue of the impact on white supremacists, the impact of the president's statement on white supremacists over the last week. Quinnipiac asked a question whether it encouraged white supremacists, discouraged them, or had no impact at all. Discouraged was just 3%, which I think is basically 0% within the margin of error, depending on how you look at it, Caitlin. So Americans have weighed in on what message they are getting. I want to change subjects right now because one subject which seems to be a central sticking point with Republicans in Congress for the president is Russia. We just learned moments ago, CNN confirmed that the president did have a conversation with Senator Tom Tillis over the legislation that Tillis is presenting to protect the special counsel, Robert Mueller, to give Congress sort of a say and judges a say in this. It turns out the president did call him and asked Tom Tillis, hey, what are you doing here? Why are you doing this? We know that the president fought with Mitch McConnell over the Russia investigations. Russia seems to loom over everything.
Sure, and this is at the center of the president's frustrations with everything, particularly within his own party. What's interesting here is, we talk a lot about what can Republicans do to hold this president accountable? What can they do to distance themselves from him? Or when will we see this break? The Russia investigation is one way that the Republicans in Congress are kind of holding their ground against Trump because they are in charge of Congress. They're in charge of all of the committees looking into this, and they have been largely supportive of the special counsel Robert Mueller. So that combined with the Russia sanctions that President Trump had to sign, this is a way for Republicans to hold their own against Donald Trump, and he's certainly frustrated with that. But it's also important to know that Trump hasn't figured out how to have any leverage with these Republican senators that he needs. He hasn't been able to figure out what encourages them, and that's been apparent in all of these negotiations on multiple issues.
You know, Michael Benner, you cover the White House, you're a White House correspondent. Who's driving this ship right now, aside from the fact that we know the President of the United States, you know, is his own person, as we said, and really is the driving force here, with Steve Bannon gone now, with Reince Priebus gone now. Is this a General John Kelly operation, or is this happening, all of this, the statements this morning, in spite of General Kelly?
I know you asked me not to give the obvious answer that the president's driving the ship, but that's the only answer here. You know, we've just seen this with Trump for too long, to put too much weight into any particular policy statement, any sort of particular promise, any specific promise, or any personnel. I mean, you know, you mentioned Bannon being jettisoned last. You know, that was in a week where he doubled down on his defense of Confederate symbols, right? I mean, he launched his first trade action against China. I mean, these are, he started renegotiations on NAFTA. That is the nationalist agenda, and he fired the guy most aligned with that. You know, General Kelly is trying to bring a change of tone within the West Wing, talking to staff over there, White House aides. He's been largely successful in bringing more a more command and control into the West Wing, but this is the president. I mean, you know, General Kelly was chief of staff when the president gave that impromptu Tuesday news conference. Right. So when it comes down to it, it's on Donald Trump. It's on the president. Sure. Here.
No, General Kelly is in fact the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday chief of staff, not just the Monday, Wednesday chief of staff. All right, guys, thank you very, very much. We do have news this morning on the Russia investigation. An email effort from a man who is now a top official inside the White House that seems to show at the very least an effort to connect the Trump campaign with Russian President Vladimir Putin last summer. The man behind that email is Rick Dearborn, the president's now deputy chief of staff. CNN Jessica Snyder live in Washington with CNN's exclusive reporting. Jessica, what's going on here?
Well, you know, John, this email detailed plans to potentially arrange a meeting with the Russian president, and it was an email that was uncovered by congressional investigators as part of a batch of about 20,000 documents turned over by the Trump campaign. So the email is from then campaign aide and now deputy chief of staff Rick Dearborn, and in it he explains that an individual was seeking to connect top Trump campaign officials with Russian President Putin. Now, the individual who attempted to arrange this get-together is being identified only as being from WV. One source says that's a reference to West Virginia. Now, in the email, Dearborn did appear skeptical of the request to set up that meeting with him, and it's unclear if Dearborn ever acted on the request. But what is notable about this email is it was sent in June 2016, around the same time of that Trump Tower meeting involving Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, and Russians who had promised damaging information on Hillary Clinton. Now, it's unclear if this latest email had any connection to that meeting, but intelligence experts are saying that this fits a pattern of Russians trying to gather human intelligence from the campaign and another attempt by them to gain an entry point into the campaign. Now, Rick Dearborn, who wrote the email and is now president's deputy chief of staff, he didn't respond to multiple requests for comment. The White House press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, says she wouldn't comment on potentially leaked documents. But, you know, John, it's yet another point of question for congressional investigators in their Russia probe. The question being, did the campaign do anything with this latest request that we're seeing for the Trump campaign officials to actually meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin? John? All
right, Jessica Snyder for us in Washington. Thank you so much. We do have some more breaking news. The president just launched a fresh attack against a security official who questioned his fitness for leadership. We'll get to that. Plus, a fresh attack this morning on the leaders of Congress. But Mitch M., as the president calls him, how much longer will he stay quiet on this? Plus, the notorious white supremacist turns himself in, facing felony charges after the Charlottesville protests. That city is on edge. We will speak to the vice mayor shortly. And breaking this morning, you still have to go to work today because you did not win Powerball. Statistically speaking, I know that to be true. However, one person did, just not in the place everyone. Okay, President Trump, just a few minutes ago, issued a new attack, some new criticism of the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and then very shortly after that, he may not have known, the Majority Leader praised the administration. It came during a breakfast speech, though he did not answer questions that were hurled to him after it. Joining me now, two men who worked very closely with the Majority Leader. Both served as Senator Mitch McConnell's chief of staff at one point. Hunter Bates is now a co-chair of the public law and policy practice at Aiken Gump. And Brian McGuire is now a policy director at Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck LLP. Both of you graduates of McConnell University. In full disclosure, both of you think that the idea of a feud between the president and the Majority Leader is overblown. But, Brian, since you know the Majority Leader so well, what does he make of it when the President of the United States seems to directly criticize his leadership in the Senate?
I think the first point to make is that Leader McConnell doesn't take anything like this personally. He's very focused now, as always, on legislative goals that he and the President shares. And so I think that's entirely what his focus is. And as for the supposed spat that they had, I think that having worked for Leader McConnell for more than a decade, I probably heard him yell once, and it was deliberate. So he does not raise his voice in those situations, and the idea that they had a shouting match to me is just not credible.
Well, it may not have been shouting, but it seems to be pretty solid reporting that it wasn't a comfortable phone call 2 weeks ago, and it was during that call that the president was critical of Senator McConnell's handling not just of Obamacare, but also of the Russia investigation and sanctions. You know, Hunter, again, based on what you know of the leader, what do you think he makes of the president's leadership style?
Look, John, what I'm going to say today is not going to drive ratings or sell newspapers, but it happens to be true. And that is that I think this entire story that the GOP legislative agenda is being derailed is completely overblown. And I think people don't really care about whether President Trump and Leader McConnell are vacationing in New Jersey or hanging out at Mar-a-Lago. What really matters here is that these two men agree on 95% of the Republican agenda. So I don't think the fact that tweets or tactics or timing, none of that changes the fact that at the core, these two men are trying to achieve the same objectives. And I think the whole notion of this conflict threatening that agenda is overblown.
Well, you know, but I'm not making it up when I do a dramatic reading right now of a statement the president just made to millions of people a short time ago. He says, let me see if I can find it here. Well, no, the president was talking. Can we put up the Mitch McConnell? If Republican Senate doesn't get rid of, no. The president went after Mitch McConnell for how he handled the debt ceiling, right? He suggested that Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell didn't raise the debt limit as part of the VA. And he says now Democrats will take over and it's a shame. He says, could have been so easy. Now it's a mess. He says, now it's a mess, the president says. So it's not me saying it's a mess. It's the president of the United States, Brian, suggesting that the way that Mitch McConnell has handled this is a mess.
Well, look, I appreciate that the president is anxious to get his agenda through, and so are Republicans in Congress. But the simple fact is that if you had attached the debt ceiling to the VA bill, both of them would have failed. So I think the more constructive approach here would be to focus on the Republicans who you need to get this thing through and the Democrats, and to talk about that.
See, but you just said in a very reasoned way something I'm sure Mitch McConnell would tell the president, Mr. President, you're just flat out wrong here. If we had done what you had said, this legislation would go down. So it gets to how the president understands the way things work inside Congress. And Hunter, to that point, the president keeps on talking about the Senate changing the filibuster rules. He wants legislation to be able to pass with just 50 votes, no chance of a filibuster. And this is something you talk to anyone in the Senate, Republican leadership, any key Republican members of the House, they say this is a really bad idea.
Well, the fact of the matter is, if you change the filibuster rule, if President Obama and Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi had changed the filibuster rule for legislation, the country would look dramatically different because President Obama would have been able to do everything that he wanted to achieve, and I think that would have been bad for the country. So I think the filibuster rule does play an important role. But to go back for just a minute about the debt ceiling tweet, again, I think the most important thing that we should see in that is that President Trump is saying that he wants the debt ceiling done. He wants it done in a way that's clean and attached to legislation that can otherwise pass. That is almost exactly what Speaker Ryan and Leader McConnell have been saying. So again, we can get worked up about the fact that they have a different approach on tactics, but at the core, on the policy issues, they're in 100% agreement. And I think that's the point we have to keep coming back to. And I think when they come back in September after Labor Day, they certainly have a very busy plate. They have only 12 legislative days for both the House and the Senate are in at the same time. But the fact that they agree on what the core objectives of that period should include, I think, is the most important point.
Brian, one of the things, the bones of contention appears to be Russia, broadly speaking, and then specifically the Russia investigation. We understand the president had a phone call with Mitch McConnell. That phone call dealt with the Russia sanctions, which the president doesn't approve of. Also, the Russia investigation, which the president doesn't approve of. And we know he talked to Senator Tom Tillis and doesn't like the idea that Congress wants to make it harder for him to fire the special counsel. What do you think the Senate Majority Leader sees as his role in dealing with the Russia investigation?
I think Leader McConnell has consistently said that this is going to be handled by the Senate Intelligence Committee, the appropriate place for it to be handled, and it is being handled there in a bipartisan way. So I think he has confidence in the Senate's ability to do a thorough investigation, and he'll wait patiently for the results of that investigation.
You know, and then Hunter, just again, broadly speaking, because so much needs to get done in September. Based on what you have seen so far, what's the number one lesson that you hope the president has learned up until this point to get things done with Congress starting in a week?
Well, again, I think the point that I would keep coming back to here is that with Leader McConnell, and who I've known for 30 years, with him it is never personal. It's about winning. It's about advancing the cause. And I think that what you're going to see when they come back after Labor Day is they're going to get the debt ceiling raised. They're going to keep the government funded. And ultimately, Republicans are going to unify around a goal that's been elusive for a generation, which is meaningful, comprehensive tax reform. And I was with Leader McConnell, Secretary Mnuchin in Louisville, Kentucky on Monday, in Leader McConnell's hometown. There was Secretary Mnuchin talking about tax reform. And the two of them were on the same page, standing shoulder to shoulder, and they have the same goals on the policy and on the process. So again, I think that the key here is these guys are aligned on policy, and ultimately they're going to get to the same place over the goal line.
Strictly business, which were also words used by Michael Corleone before things ended very badly from some other people inside The Godfather. But Brian and Hunter, I do appreciate your insight here. I think it's important to get this insight from inside McConnell world to get a sense of these stories that are going on right now. Appreciate it, guys. All right, as we talk now, the clock is ticking on Congress. The debt ceiling deadline, it does loom. And this morning we are learning that October is when the Treasury Department says it will run out of money to pay the country's bills in full and on time. So how will that influence the markets today? CNN Chief Business Correspondent, Star of Early Star, Christine Romans.
It's called the X date, and it's right. It's called the X date, and it's bad. It's when the government doesn't have enough money coming in the coffers to pay all the bills.
Like really
it is a very bad date.
Someone
The
said
X
bad
date. Yep,
dates.
yep.
The
You
X
don't
date
want
sounds
this.
terrible.
This is, you do not. You want to swipe left for this date or swipe right? I'm not sure, but it's not good. And so this could be maybe early October to mid-October. Here's what happens if the U.S. Can't raise the debt ceiling. It's at 19.8 trillion right now. There could be a possible U.S. credit downgrade. Federal employees, contractors wouldn't get paid. World markets could tank here. Basically, when that date happens, the U.S. about 25%, maybe a quarter of all the bills that come due, the U.S. won't be able to pay. So that could be what? The Treasury Secretary would decide what gets paid. Maybe you give IOUs to senior citizens for their Social Security checks. That would really get everybody's attention. It's not just the debt ceiling, John, the X date. September 30th is the end of the fiscal year. The government runs out of funding. Funding the government is a big problem here. And as you know, the president has said he would like to tie border wall funding to overall government funding. So you've got September 30th, early to mid-October, these very important deadlines here. But stock markets have been a little bit more euphoric in the last day or so. And here's why, because there are rumblings in Washington that they are moving forward on tax reform. But at some point, you're going to be surprised I'm saying this, at some point, all of these players need a win. And that win is going to be something to do with tax reform.
It's astounding that all investors want is a tax cut. They will look beyond anything and everything if they feel like they're getting a tax cut.
I think it could be a little bit volatile, though, from here on to the end of the year with all of these funding deadlines coming, with fits and starts on tax reform. There are a lot of risks for a market that's up 20% over the past year.
Christine Romans, great to have you. Everyone on Tinder right now planning for their next date. All right, Charlottesville moves to cover up Confederate statues as that city looks to move forward after the white nationalist rally. One civil rights leader says the focus should be on substance, not symbols. Charlottesville's vice mayor joins me next. The NFL season kicks off in 2 weeks, and one of the most talked about players may not even take the field. Colin Kaepernick is a free agent, means no team. Because of that, hundreds of protesters flooded the streets outside the NFL headquarters in New York to show solidarity to Kaepernick, famous, of course, for kneeling during the national anthem last season. Many people believe the NFL is blackballing Kaepernick for expressing his political views.
The NFL is 70% people of color. They need the black and brown community. So the blackball Colin Kaepernick, that's not in their best interest, and at the same time, it's just absolutely wrong.
Obviously, the NFL thinks he's bad for business, obviously. We all know NFL is an $11 billion organization.
He's not yelling or screaming or being disrespectful. He's just bringing attention to a very important issue. They have a problem with it.
With me now, the former president of the NFL Players Association, former defensive end for the New York Giants, George Martin. George, thanks so much for being with us. Why isn't Colin Kaepernick on a football team?
Well, thank you very much, John. First of all, I think the NFL has its own subjective and, in many cases, objective ways of determining talent. Far be it for me to say why they are or are not inviting Colin into camp, but it seems very suspicious that a man of his talents, who has great postseason experience, has great leadership. And by the way, when you have a quarterback position, you tend to look for characteristics that he's displaying. Strong commitment, leadership, and I think courage. And that's what he's displaying with his stance.
You don't question whether or not he's a good enough football player to be on an NFL team right now. You just think he is.
Oh, absolutely. I know unequivocally that he has the talent to be on a team. Maybe not as a starter, but certainly as a backup.
Then the question becomes, are these teams looking at that and their decision to bring him on? Maybe doesn't have to be a statement saying we disapprove of him taking the knee last year during the national anthem. What some people suggest is these teams are saying we just don't want the controversy that surrounds it inside our locker room.
Well, it's unfortunate they would take either one of those positions because, again, I think that to be a professional athlete, as I was for 14 years, it should be predicated on talent and talent alone. And he has demonstrated that he has those abilities, and to be blackballed or to be shut out or shunned because of his political statements, I think is wrong.
Even if the coach or the general manager is saying that his abilities would help us win, but the controversy may get in the way of winning.
I don't see how the controversy can get in the way of them winning. I mean, once the turnstiles are open and people come in, it's football. They're playing football, and he's performing on the field as an athlete, not as a politician or making a statement beyond the national anthem.
You heard some of those protesters out there suggesting the NFL writ large had somehow decided to keep Kaepernick out. Do you think there's any collusion here, or do you think it's really individual teams deciding the same thing?
I don't think there's any grand conspiracy there because teams are independent enough where they can make their own decisions. And I don't think that any mandate would come down from Roger Goodell to keep him out of the league.
The players' union, you know, players in general, what's their role right now? What should they be doing in your mind in support, if you think that's what's important in Colin Kaepernick?
I definitely think there should be a loud voice of support coming out of Washington NFL Players Association. It should be, because that's what we have the unions for, to protect our safeguard our profession. And I'm not hearing that right now, but I think it will over time.
Why Colin Kaepernick when a dozen guys from the Cleveland Browns took the knee in a game just a few days ago? You know, they did it. They're playing. Why isn't Colin Kaepernick?
Well, you know, John, I'll go back in history. When you look at what happened with the 1968 Olympics with John Carlos and the guys, when you look at Muhammad Ali, when you look at even Paul Robeson, they were all persecuted for making a social stance. And history did something unique. It went back in retrospect and has deemed them all heroes. And I think that a similar situation will be done in Colin's case. In retrospect, people will look and see what a courageous thing he's done, what a tremendous sacrifice he's made, and I hope he will be vindicated.
You know, a lot of teams, quarterbacks, that's for sure, and this goes way beyond football. George Martin, an honor to have you here with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John. My pleasure.
All right, those Powerball daydreams, they can stop now. You didn't win. One person did, but there is some intrigue this morning because they didn't win where we thought they did. And then breaking minutes ago, the president takes on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell again. We told you he did it at the top of the show, but it's happened since we started. We're on top of the latest developments coming up.
So which is it? Does the president want to put the country first and heal wounds and unite, or be Trump, flame-throwing and divisive? The answer may be clear to you, but the president seems to be confused. Why? Well, 6 different times he's flip-flopped on the moral mandate raised by the ugliness in Charlottesville. Here are the facts. First response was Saturday the 12th.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
Now, the on many sides, mitigating moral monsters like the KKK was not liked. So 2 days later, those many sides were gone.
We must love each other, show affection for each other, and unite together in condemnation of hatred, bigotry, and violence.
But when pressed by reporters about his initial error, Trump did what he does most. He doubled down.
I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides.
Then, when his own party finally came out to beat back the president's divisiveness, Trump spoke of unity and said, "We owe it to the troops."
When we open our hearts to patriotism, there is no room for prejudice, no place for bigotry, and no tolerance for hate.
Just a day later, literally a day later, the country that the troops deserve gave way to the political reality that Trump wants, once again saying he did nothing wrong.
I hit him with neo-Nazi. I hit him with everything. I got the white supremacists, the neo-Nazi, I got them all in there. Let's see. Yeah, KKK, we have KKK.
Then, again, literally the next day, back on prompter, reading somebody else's words in Nevada, we heard this.
It is time to heal the wounds that divide us and to seek a new unity based on the common values that unite us.
What is the deal? Let's debate this with CNN political commentators. We've got Anna Navarro and Ben Ferguson. I mean, Ben, it's always nice to be standing. Good to see you. Good to see you. So, it seems obvious what's going on, okay? He believes what he says when he's with those crowds, okay? Antifa, KKK, they're both bad. And that's it. And you don't want to say it, but that's what he believes. And then every once in a while, somebody says, look, you're putting us in a hole. Say this. And he will literally be tied to the prompter. He doesn't even really move from screen to screen. That's how tied he is to somebody else's words. But it's clearly not where his head is on this issue right now. I mean, isn't that just a fair reckoning?
I disagree with you a little bit. I think there's different settings where you have different things that you can say. When you're talking to your base, you're going to have much more of a blunt conversation. He doesn't need a teleprompter then. If he's in his rally, which is a place that he loves and he feels like it's literally, that's probably one of his happiest places to be. He's going to be him. He's going to be Donald Trump. If he's going the next day and he's talking to a different group of people, whether it's the military or a more formal setting the day after that you saw yesterday with a teleprompter, I don't think it's fair to say those are not his words. He obviously goes over that. He goes over it with a speechwriter. Every president has somebody that writes for them. But if Donald Trump doesn't like it, he will go off that teleprompter and people criticize him for it.
And he does exactly that. 24 hours later, Anna, he says the message that's supposed to be given as presidential, and then he fights it. So it's not just the same as saying, I'm going to give one set of policy ideas to you because you're the Texan, and I'll give another one to you. Yes, politicians do that. This is about morality. This is about who is bad and who is good, or what is bad and what is good. It's not something like just selling different items to people.
And I think you just hit upon it. Look, if he was reading a teleprompter and then giving an off-the-cuff speech about policy, none of us expect Donald Trump to be Albert Einstein. None of us expect him to be a tenured professor at Harvard. We know he doesn't know policy. But this was a basic moral issue. This was about condemning white supremacy. This was about condemning hatred and racism. If you cannot have a consistent message on that, then you have a real problem. We are not asking him for consistency on details. We are asking him for consistency on right and wrong. And it's not only that he was inconsistent, it's that he was inconsistent over and over again. He said one thing on Saturday. He said another thing on Monday. He said another thing on Tuesday. He said another thing. You know, I mean, it is one day after the other. So this is very simple. It is the real Trump versus the scripted Trump. It is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
I don't think it's that. I think it's an issue of Donald trying to navigate and figure out exactly how to communicate, not as a candidate, not as Donald Trump, the guy who goes out there and connects with a lot of people that voted for him and made him president. I think he's trying to figure out exactly, sometimes you have to talk differently when you actually are the president of the United States of America. I think what he's learned this week or over the last week and a half is you got to get certain issues right every time. You got to have a clear and concise message. What he had the other night when he talked about the war in Afghanistan was very clear and concise. There was no ambiguity there. That's where I do think the president could probably learn from that night and go, that was a good night for the president, right? That was a night when people walked away and they said, I feel comfortable with this. I feel like he has an understanding of the issue. I think the president has to start doing that more often. I agree with you that you don't want to have, when you're walking out there, one thing that you say on a Tuesday that looks like it's different than what you said on a Wednesday. But I also think that Donald Trump should have the right to be Donald Trump and to not have everything. Some people, I think, focus in so much on certain little words and things. He cleared up when he was in his rally the other night. He didn't say both sides. Most people said he shouldn't ever have said both sides.
Actually, he did say it. He just said it in different words. When he said they are trying to take away our history, that's both sides. He is pitting American versus American with those words. And he lost the right to be divisive the day he became president of the United States of America. He is not the president of the divided states of America. He just lost the right to pit one American versus another the day he took that oath of office.
I think you can have a real conversation about people that become violent. And that doesn't mean that you're necessarily a bad person. Like what we've done is we basically put the president saying, you can only say this, you can't have a real conversation about this. We should be able, when we're watching on TV, people that are literally being violent, it is insane to imply that somehow the president shouldn't be able to talk about those people that are literally wearing a gas mask, throwing a canister of gas, throwing urine at police officers.
Ben, the only time he's getting a coherent message is when he's on teleprompter. You almost get the feeling that John Kelly is behind a curtain somewhere, operating a shot caller.
But also, he got elected by not being on a teleprompter.
Despite saying, crazy, incoherent things.
He got elected not being on teleprompter.
Lindsey Graham might have beat him if he was on teleprompter the whole time.
We're connecting with a base. There are a lot of good reasons, positive attributes that got him elected for the group of people that voted for him. There's no question about it. This is about something else. This isn't about how you do it. It's about what's in here and what's in here. You either think that Nazis and people fighting against Nazis are different on a moral basis, or you don't. It's not about the violence. Violence is wrong. If you are violent when you protest, you're a rioter. You're not a protester. So whether it's Antifa or it's BLM or it's a white supremacist, when you commit a crime in the act of protest, you surrender the First Amendment right to a criminal violation. It was never an issue. It was that people like Heather Heyer, who were there to fight against white supremacy, were somehow equal to them because they both got violent. And you know that's not true because you condemned it.
Absolutely.
But you're also defending the president as if somehow this is about picking audiences and learning how to be president. No,
I don't
it's
think
about
it's that.
what is in your heart. You either think it's wrong or you don't.
Okay, here's what I'll say, though. I think there was many Americans that watched what was going on TV, and they literally were visually seeing people that were violent over here and violent over here. And there was a real conversation the next day about that, because when you watched it, you knew that there were people on both sides that were being violent. The problem is,
when the blacks were fighting against people with fire hoses in the 60s. No, hold on. Because the analogy is a specious analogy. I've heard it many times. When the blacks were fighting against the people with the fire hoses, were they morally equal? Were they morally equal?
You know the answer to that.
No is the answer. They were not morally equal. So when the white supremacist has the torch, and I get up in the white supremacist's face, and we start going at it, and there's a fight, are we morally equal? No. I'm fighting against hate.
There's a right side and a wrong side.
And that's the part that doesn't make sense. And you said that in the aftermath.
And I said that, and I agree with it now. There's no, when you're the president of the United States of America, there are certain issues you have to always get right. The issue of race is definitely one of those. When you see someone hate, race, bigotry, whatever that may be in that category, you have to always get that issue right. I totally agree with you. At the same time, I do not think that there is a problem having a real conversation about the fact that there are certain people, I don't care, that show up at these events to become violent and to act as if there were people there that were not there solely to be violent.
Yeah, but Ben, what happened that Saturday at UVA was not. But listen, we cannot say that about the people that showed up, the very brave young students, UVA students who showed up to counter protest on Saturday. They didn't show up there to be violent. They showed up there to defend American values. And we have got to talk about just how reprehensible this speech, this rally speech in Arizona was. He spent minutes after minutes relitigating his response to Charlottesville. It was all about him. Then he is in Arizona, just miles away is John McCain, a national hero who was hanging by his thumbs for 5 years while Donald Trump was getting 5 draft deferments, and he leads the chant against John McCain. He fosters an environment where people show up with signs that say John McCain is a traitor and John McCain should die. A man who's going through chemotherapy, a man who's fighting cancer right now. That is reprehensible. Then he says you versus ours when it comes to Americans. That is reprehensible. He gives a passing mention to Heather Heyer. That is reprehensible.
Final word. I think the president, you know, I don't know if someone showed up and had a sign that said John McCain should die. If they do, that's reprehensible. It's wrong. Okay, then I'm saying it's wrong. John McCain is in politics. John McCain knows in politics you're going to have a vicious debate. I don't like, and I love John McCain. I really do. But John McCain, I think, understands that when you're in politics, it's going to get heated. And John McCain doesn't mind that. So let's not act like he's, you know, somehow not able to handle himself.
I'm sorry, but Donald Trump is not fit to say John McCain.
Look, you're allowed to have political fights, but it's about how you fight. About what the level of disagreement is. You don't like my policy, that's one thing. But you wouldn't insult my dead father. You wouldn't say that I'm not a hero because I got captured. You know, there's certain things that you do because it's about decency, and then there's politics, and they can go together. We're just seeing them get torn apart by this tribal politics. Ben, Anna, you did a good job. I thought we were going to go at it. I thought there was a plate of metal.
Yeah, and this is not from him.
I thought you were like Iron Mike Sharp from the old WWF days.
By the way, anybody comes after your father, I'm defending him too.
But no, it was everything. Allison.
Hey, Chris. Sending a message to the NFL why hundreds of protesters say quarterback Colin Kaepernick is being kept off the field. We have the latest for you.